Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron, and I'm a developer evangelist here at Yext. And today I'm going to be introducing the Answers React component library that was just came out with the spring release. It makes it easy to add reusable search UI components to a new or existing React application. So I need to start sharing my screen here. And I'm going to get started by showing first the Yext sandbox account that I'm going to be using today. And you can see I have a couple custom entity types, but I'm just going to be focusing on the beverage entity type here today. I have about 1,000 entities in the knowledge graph, and each entity has a name, a photo, some other information like ABV and price that you'll be seeing when I start actually developing my custom answers experience with the component library here. Now, I also want to show the Answers React component getting started guide that we have up on Hitchhikers. Melissa, if you want to drop that link in the chat in case others want to get started with this component library. So I've actually already started my application and I'm using Vite. Melissa, if you could also drop the link to Vite in the chat. And I'm going to be using Vite today, but the same steps would apply with Create React app as well, if you're more familiar with that. And I've installed the Answers React components with NPM, and I've installed Tailwind already into my application. So I've already followed step 1 and 2, and now I'll go over to VS Code, and I'll just point out in my package, just move something out of the way here. So in package.json, you can see I've added the Answers React components. And whenever you install Answers React components, it also comes with Answers Headless React. And Answers Headless React is something that we've had released for a few months, and it's basically a custom Redux implementation, and it handles all of the client-side API calls to the Answers API, and then manages all of your Answers data in a Redux state. And it comes with some custom hooks that the Answers React components take advantage of for grabbing information from the state and then manipulating the state based on certain actions that are triggered by the components. So before I can get started with the components, one last step I have to do is go over to main.tsx. And I need to first import the Answers Headless Provider component from Answers Headless React. So now that I've added that, I will wrap my app in Answers Headless Provider. Take this closing tag, put it here. And Answers Headless Provider, the linter is yelling at me because I need to add some Answers configuration here, and I'm keeping my configuration in a separate file. You could also put the configuration here. I just choose to keep the configuration in a separate file. So I'm calling that file Answers Headless Config. Here I have my Answers Experience API key, the experience key. I'm using a sandbox environment or a sandbox account, so I had to add the sandbox endpoints here. And so I will add that configuration to my provider, Answers Headless Config. And now I can get started by adding a few components in app.tsx. I've already added some container divs here. And within this div, I'm going to add the search bar component imported from Answers React components. Also going to add vertical results. And vertical results will display the results that are in my answer state after the search is triggered from the search bar. Vertical results requires a card component prop. And these are this is the component that's going to be used to display the search results from the answer state. So I'm going to just use the standard card for now, another component that's imported from the library, standard card, import that. So now in my terminal, I'm going to do npm run dev. And you can see using Vite, the dev server starts up really fast. It's just something that I like as opposed to using Create React app. But again, you could do this same process here in Create React app as well, and it would work. So if I go over here and go to localhost 3000, you can see my search bar at the top of the screen, and I can start searching. And without any extra configuration, I'm already getting some autocomplete results. I can do a search here, and the results will be returned. And since I'm just using the standard card, it's just going to display the title of the beverage along with a description. And I just want to call out that from personal experience, building custom search bars in React, especially when you're dealing with autocomplete, is not an easy task, considering that on every keystroke, you need to make an API call, manage those autocomplete results in a Redux state or in React context if you chose to use that instead. You also need to think about how the different buttons in your search bar work. So there's really a lot going on here. And I think it's nice that you can just drop this search bar component into your application, and without any further configuration out of the box, you're already getting a lot of really nice features. The next thing I'm going to add to my new search experience here is some facets so that I can change the results here, trigger a new search after the initial search. So back in the code here, close the terminal. I'm going to go over to another component that I've already started writing called beverage filters. And in beverage filters, I'm using the filters.facets component from the Answers React components. For now, I'm just going to be pulling out the alcohol by volume facet. So when you use the filters facets component, you get access to the facets that are in the answer state. I'm just pulling out the ABV facet. You can see it's a custom field because the field ID is prefixed with C underscore. And so for each facet that I have in filters facets, I'm going to have a different filter group. So this one's going to be for ABV. I'm going to add a container div here. And I'm going to add some Tailwind classes. So I'm going to put a margin on the bottom, MB8, and then I'm going to add some margin to the left, ML4. And within this container div, I'm going to put another div to label these facets. So I'm going to do ABV, and I'm going to make this fonts bold. And I'm going to put a margin on the bottom of this, margin 6. And then I'm going to, so each facet has a series of options. So if you were doing, if this facet were beer types, for example, instead of ABV, it would be, each option would be Pilsner and Lager and IPA, etc. But I'm actually going to be using a numerical facet here today. And numerical facets are also something that came out with the spring release. And to get started with that, I'm going to show you my answers configuration. So if I come over here to my account and I go into webinar and the answers config for this account, I'm using numerical facets, and I've created static buckets for my numerical facets. So for example, if you have an alcoholic beverage that has between 1 and 4.9% alcohol, so your light beers, maybe some Pilsners, they would appear in this bucket here. If you're talking about hard liquor, whiskey, tequila, vodka, they would appear in this bucket. So you'd have, between 40 and 49.9% alcohol by volume. Melissa, if you want to drop the numerical facets guide that we have in Hitchhikers, so you can learn more about how you can implement numerical facets, you can actually, instead of using static buckets, you can use a dynamic algorithm so that answers will actually generate the buckets for you. I'm not going to be using that today, but you can read more about that in the link that Melissa just dropped in the chat. So I'm going to map through the different ABV facet options. So each one of these options is a different bucket that I just alluded to. So if we do map, dot map, and then we take the option, we map that to a filters dot checkbox option. And checkbox option has some props I need to pass. First, I'm going to pass a label. So this is going to have I'm going to use some backticks here. So we're going to have option dot display name. And then next to that, I'm going to put in parentheses, I'm going to put the count. So how many results actually appear in each bucket. So option.count. Then I need to pass value. So that's going to be option dot value. And then by default, checkbox option uses an equals matcher, but I need this facet, I need to use the between matcher. So I'm going to do matcher equals matcher dot between. And then finally, I'm going to copy and paste some custom styling that I'm going to be using on each checkbox option. So I'm just going to, for sake of time, I'm just going to copy and paste that. Okay, so now I have my beverage filters component ready to go. It's going to have facets inside. I call it beverage filters because this component could encompass facets, but it could also incorporate, I could use some static filters in here as well. So I'm going to save this, and back in app.tsx, I'm going to put vertical results in a div. I'm going to put vertical results in this container. And then I'm going to create another container for my beverage filters. And then I need to add a container, a parent div for each of those. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to cut and paste here. And this is going to be a flex box. So class name flex. And I'm going to have this take up, these beverage filters take up 1/3 of the width of the parent container. So I'm going to do width dash 1/3, save, and hopefully everything looks okay over here. Okay, so now you can see I have my numerical facets on the left. So if I filter down for, let's say I've got 8 non-alcoholic beer, so that's considered beer that has less than 1% alcohol by volume. So if I click on that, you can see the search results are returned. So Heineken non-alcoholic 0.0. So this is starting to be more of a full-fledged search experience. It still looks pretty generic though, and I don't really love these standard cards for the sake of my beverages. So I'm going to create a custom component called beverage card, and I've actually already added beverage card here. And so beverage card is going to eventually be passed to vertical results, and vertical results is going to pass for each search result that's returned that's in the answer state. So it's going to pass a result to this component. So here I'm going to display, I'm going to use another custom component I created called placeholder image. And I'm going to be using a lot of image placeholder. I'm going to be using a lot of components here today that I've already written, that I've already included in the code base here, but I am going to make this code publicly available when I'm done here today. So you'll be able to dive in deeper if you're interested into seeing some of the other things that I'm doing here that I won't be covering today in the webinar. So in this component, I've added the ability to pass some CSS, some Tailwind utility classes to change the size of the image that appears. And then I'm going to take the image URL from my beverage result. So I'm going to do beverage dot primary photo dot image dot URL, and then I have a placeholder image. So the purpose of this image placeholder component, again, this is something I wrote, it's not part of the component library, is to show a placeholder image in the case that either the entity in the knowledge graph doesn't have an image or the image hasn't rendered yet. So I'm going to use this gray wine bottle icon, which is an SVG that I've already added to my application. And then I'm going to just paste in some containers. So this will have the beverage name here. And then I'm going to add this container that will have beverage rating and beverage price. Star rating is another component that I wrote that will take the rating of the beverage. So if the beer is rated 4.6 out of 5, it'll round to the nearest half star. So this would round it to 4.5 stars. So the reason I'm showing you all of this is just to illustrate that you can create really custom components and have them work hand in hand with the answers react components. So I'm going to save this beverage card, and back in app.tsx, I'm going to replace standard card with beverage card and save. And you can see now that the results look different. I'm not using standard cart anymore. I'm not displaying the description, but I've got the photo of the beverage along with the name, price, and a rating. Now, I don't really like how this is laid out just one after each other. I would prefer this to be a grid. So I can change that by changing, passing some custom Tailwind classes to vertical results. So I'm going to change the results here. And I'm going to pass. So I'm going to make the results appear in a grid. And this is the first time I'm introducing Tailwind responsive classes. Melissa, if you could drop the link for Tailwind responsive classes in the chat. Basically what this is doing is it's saying on most on screens up until the small breakpoint, so up until small screens and larger, the results are going to appear in 3 columns, but on small mobile screens, there will be 2 columns of results. So I think it'll be easier if I save and show you that. And now I have my results laid out in a grid, which I think looks pretty nice. Now, I would still say this whole experience looks pretty generic. So the last thing I'm going to be adding to my application today is a custom header. And I'm going to actually move the search bar from here into the header. And you'll see that in a lot of e-commerce and all over the web. You'll see a lot of times the search bar is in the header. So back in my code, I've already added a header component, and there's a lot going on here. And again, I'll share this code. Most of the functions in here are for responsive design, so that whenever you have the viewport is different sizes, like if you're on a mobile, like if you're on your mobile phone versus an iPad versus a laptop, the header will look different. And the only thing I'm going to add is in this function called render header links in search bar. I'm going to place this comment here with the search bar component from the components library. I'm going to, again, paste in some custom styles. Oops, wrong styles. So custom CSS classes, I'm going to change the search bar container, the input container, and the logo container a little bit. So this will just change the look and feel of my search bar a little bit. I'm also going to use the placeholder prop. So I can pass a string to this. So instead of it just saying, what's it say right now? So it's just blank right now. I can have this be search for beer, wine, and liquor. So I'll save that. And then I'm going to take this header component, and back in app.tsx, I'm going to remove search bar because now my search bar is in the header. I'll put the header here, save. And now I've got a custom header up here. And I want this to freeze at the top while I can scroll the results. So I need to add a little more styling here. So I'm going to absolutely position my vertical results and the facets. So this needs to be absolute and then place down from the top, and going to put a bottom class here, overflow auto, so I can scroll, and then just some vertical padding. So once I do that, I have my results, and I can scroll the results underneath that header, which is pretty nice. And the last part here is that header component, because I'm using Tailwind responsive utilities, when I shrink down the viewport here, you can see that header, the styles changed up here. And then if I shrink down this, the vertical results go from 3 columns of results to 2. These beverage facets don't really fit though. So I'm going to do, so my beverage filters, and this, I'm going to have it be hidden on smaller screens, but then on the medium breakpoint and larger, I'm just going to have this be flex. I think that's all I need to do. So it'll still show up here. Okay, and then on smaller screens, you can see that the facets disappear. Obviously, on mobile screens, I still want to be able to use the facets. I'm not going to do it today, but you would basically have a button here to put the facets over top of the search results so that you could filter on your results on mobile screens. Also forgot to mention that the vertical results come with a pagination pagination component. So if I were to click on the 2 here, it'll go to my next page of results. So pagination is automatically implemented for you whenever you use that vertical results component. So I'll go back to page 1. Now I want this search bar to overlay on top of the screen when I click this icon. And in main.tsx, I'm using React Context, and I apologize that I won't be going into how I implemented this overlay provider. But basically what I'm doing is I'm tracking some actions throughout my application to know whenever I should have certain overlays open on top of the search results. Really why I want to show you this today is to show you that in header, so now whenever I click this search icon, the search bar will appear over top of the results. So I could search for logger here, but the search overlay is still open. So I need to close this whenever I search. And this is highlighting another feature of the component that I can do on search. And I can change the default functionality of the search bar to instead call my handle search function that will execute a vertical query and then use the overlay context I created to basically close that overlay. So what I'm highlighting here is that you can change the default functionality of a lot of what comes with these components, so you can actually change how they work. So I'm using this function instead of the default. I'll save. And now whenever I search, it'll close that screen and it'll close that overlay and I get the results. The last thing here, one thing I wanted to add was I wanted to show you how I can use answers headless along with the components. So one last thing I'm going to add is I'm going to use answer state from answers headless React here. And I'm going to drop in, I'm going to get is loading. So is the search loading? So if the search is loading, I want to display a custom shaker, this basically this cocktail shaker component that I created, and I added some animation to it. So whenever the search results are loading, instead of showing the vertical results component, I'm going to replace this. So whenever the search results are loading, so I'm using answers headless here to track when the results are loading, and when they are loading, I'm going to use this cocktail shaker. So I'm going to add that import, and so when it's loading, I'm going to show this shaker icon, and then I'm going to show the vertical results whenever it's done loading. I'll save that, and so if I do a search for Pilsner, I get my nice little shaker icon when the search results are loading, and then I get the search results. And I can expand the screen here just to show that I have a different layout again for desktop versus mobile. I use the facet to narrow down results. And yeah, that's all I wanted to show today. I will let you know that I also have a more complete version of this application that I have hosted here. So I've added a lot more features to this, and it has links to different pages. And I've added more custom facets and this price range filter, custom sorting filter. So throughout this application, I'm using both the component library and answers headless to build a unique search experience. So that's all the code and everything that I wanted to show today. And so now I'll open it up to questions. And it looks like we have a question here. In your experience, what is off the shelf from the library versus what did you have to customize? And do you know if there's a plan going forward for adding to the library versus what will remain more custom? So I will say that it's really nice to have out of the box autocomplete functionality and have everything taken care of for you if you want to just add vertical results to your app. But then I also have the option of using answers headless to build custom components like the sort component here. This is the more complete version of this application or I'm using answers headless to build the sorting component to sort the results alphabetically. So I think there's a nice combination of both being able to not have to create everything, but then also you have the flexibility as a developer to add a lot of custom experiences to your applications as well. And it looks like we have another question here around analytics and if analytics are being tracked whenever I'm clicking on different things. So I will say I haven't added the analytics TypeScript library, the analytics client that we have. I haven't added that to either versions of this application yet, but we do have an analytics TypeScript client that I could plug into my application so that on each result click, I could be tracking whenever people are using or when people are clicking on different pieces of my application and tracking that all in the analytics engine. So yeah. Are there, does anyone else have any questions?
Hey, Aaron, it looks like there are a couple of questions in the chat. Are you able to see those?
Okay, so yeah, I do see them. And the first question here is, when I install answers by NPM, then I can use answers headless. I can import answers headless provider. And that's correct. So whenever you install, whenever you do a, let me see back in the guide here. So whenever you add Yext answers React components, that if you're using NPM, that will automatically add answers headless React. So then you can use in main, you can use answers headless provider. And you just have to add the import from answers headless React instead of, for example, instead of importing from answers headless or answers React components, you just need to make sure you're importing answers headless provider from answers headless React. But the original question was, do you get that whenever you install answers? And the answer is yes. And we have another question here. Is there a recommendation feature within answers predicting what else a visitor may have interest in? So actually that's on the, I'm pretty sure that's on the product roadmap right now. It's something that we're looking closely at. And I think there may be upcoming features, pretty soon, but it's not available right now, but it is on the product roadmap. So can you define headless? That's a good question. So Answers Headless was released in the winter release, and it is basically a layer that sits on top of the Answers API. And so that you can add that to your React application, or you could add it to a React native application. And it basically defines your whole answer state within your application. So you can basically, it takes care of all the client side API calls for you, and then all of the answers data, you have access to that with the custom answers hooks that are in your React application. So you don't have to write any of the client side code to call the APIs. You don't have to write any of the state management code. That's all handled for you with Answers Headless React, and the answers components use Answers Headless, but then I use it in a couple components directly. I use the hooks directly sometimes, and then sometimes I use the components. I hope that answers that question. Okay, cool. Well, like I said, I'll make this code available along with the recording of this video so people can check out the complete code, both of what I did here today and then the more complete version of the app. And then if anyone has any further questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. And that's it. So thanks everyone for joining.